Hello, good morning, good afternoon. Thank you for joining another Taos webinar. Today, as you can see from the title, we'll talk about data cleaning. Data is a word we hear a lot in our industry, always already, of course, but especially lately, because we've realized that when you want to have very high quality machine translation, data is the differentiator. The algorithms are open source, they're all similar, but data is what defines the quality. So if you want to have the right data, it needs to be clean data. And in today's webinar, I've invited my colleagues from the NLP team to join me and talk about data cleaning. And they'll introduce the different data services, the problems that they can see in data. So why is cleaning required? We've also outlined 10 steps in cleaning data, which we'll explain to you along with the different tools, also their limitations. We'll give you some examples, comparisons, and we'll discuss some of the latest techniques on sentence embeddings with Laser and LabC. I don't know if that's the right pronunciation. And of course, we'll do a Q&A at the end. So if you have any questions that pop up in your mind anytime during the presentation, please type them into the question box in the Q&A, and we have about 15 minutes reserved at the end to go through them. So maybe the only thing left for me to do is introduce my colleagues. Amir Kamran, head of NLP at Taos, Andras Aponyi, who is an NLP research analyst, and Milos Milovanovic, who is our head of business. And you see me here also on the right sides. My name is Annemai van der Meer. So on to you, Milos.
Hello, good morning, good evening, everybody. My name is Milos Milovanovic and welcome to today's webinar. I'll start with a quick overview of what Taos is doing. Taos is now a language data network and a gateway to the language data. We started in 2008 with Data Cloud and slowly merged it to the data marketplace. We've been advocating the principles of data sharing for the last 12 years, 13 now already. We're already in 2021. And ever since then, we stated that the data is most important thing in machine translation engines customization. What we see nowadays is that a lot of different engines is plugging into place to be used for different language pairs to get small improvements in BlueScore. We think that some improvements can be gained with that, but the real improvement can be gained with domain-specific data. And we've proven that with a recent case study we did on the healthcare domain that we did together with Systran, where BlueScores have been increased from 4 to 12 absolute points. So we are into the data space, and next to the data and the repositories from Data Cloud to Data Marketplace, we also have a matching data as a service that is a cluster search and a technique where we take the sample of data, domain-specific sample from our clients. We run a query on all available repositories in a specific language pair, and we create an output data set that is fully domain-specific and tailor-made for the needs of our clients. And these data sets created with the matching data service are then published in our data library that can be publicly accessed by anybody. You can access the samples, you can see the counts, and depending on the samples, counts, domain, you can decide whether to actually acquire the data or not. The fourth quadrant here is representing the data services. Data services are data cleaning, data anonymization, quality review, data annotation, different on-demand services, and eventually data creation. Today's webinar will be about the data cleaning, and I'd like to give a microphone to my colleague Amir, who will tell you more about it. Amir?
Yeah, thanks, Milos. Yeah, and hello, everyone. So my name is Amir Kamran. I am leading the NLP team at Taos. Let's talk a little bit about why data cleaning is important. So as Annemai already mentioned in the start, that Data is now the new oil. Everyone needs data to train these NLP models, whether it's machine translation or any other NLP related job. We need good data. But what is good data? So is it just more data, or is it the right data in the right domain and the right cleaning is performed, which can give us good results? Because we know that in the past, SMT models were used heavily everywhere, and in SMT models you can actually add more data. Even if they are noisy, they can give you slightly better results, and they were not that prone to the noise. But with the NMT models now, although the results are much better compared to SMT, but a small bit of noise can also ruin the model. And we need to perform really good job of cleaning to make sure that the data that we are putting into the NMT models can give us some better results. So what is this noise in the data and where it's coming from? Because you know that the data is actually coming from various sources. A big chunk of data is coming from the web, which is automatically aligned by different projects and users. But then there is also these translation memories, which is coming from various translation agencies and from also users. But over the period of time, these memories are also sometimes getting corrupted by duplicate translations, or sometimes because now NT is used in the translation process, so there is a possibility that a machine translation is not properly edited, post-edited. So we identify that there are a lot of problems in the data. Let me see. Okay, yeah. So the different kinds of noise that data have, it could be just poor translations, or it could be misalignment where the sentences are not properly aligned. For example, sometimes the translation is just half, and half of the sentence is untranslated. Sometimes the sentence is completely wrong. Sometimes the translation is good, but the language that is being claimed in the translation memory, it's not the right language. Sometimes there are problems with data is being repeated, or something extra is inserted. Duplication is one problem. Then there is also encoding errors. A lot of the times there are Unicode issues. There are issues with foreign characters in a particular language. All these makes the data bad. And even when we are doing domain adapted MT, you really need a good quality domain adapted data set. And if there is data that is unrelated to that domain, that is also bad data, and that should also be cleaned to be used in training. So how to solve all this? What we have come up with is 10 steps. Out of these 10 steps, the 5 on the left are mandatory steps that we always perform, whatever we are trying to do, whether it's something being uploaded on Marketplace, whether it's a matching data request coming to us. These 5 steps are already there, and also these are mandatory steps for the custom cleaning request as well. But then we have also some other steps that involve supervision of humans, or crowdsourcing is involved. And these are the steps that are required according to the scenario and according to the task. So the most important thing is to first identify the order of these steps. And for example, you are doing tokenization first, because if you don't identify different words in the sentences, all the other rules that are following that, you can't apply that properly. So that's why the order is very important. And what we have learned over the years with our data cloud exposure, that there are a lot of different issues that are very particular to different languages, for example, or are very particular to using different kind of tools that can create those problems as well. So these rules, once you apply those, majority of the problems of the data can be resolved in a bilingual parallel data. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to talk about all these different steps. And I will also give some examples to show what kind of problems can occur and what kind of tools you can basically use to resolve these issues and how complicated these different functionalities are. So the first step is to tokenize, because when you are getting a sentence or a sentence pair, it's just text. In some languages, it is delimited by spaces, but there are so many languages where space is not the delimiter. So how to identify the unit which is a word? And this is the process called tokenization. And it's basically a language dependent task, because in each language the boundary of a word is different. There are so many libraries available already to basically tokenize different language data. There is some Python modules available. There is NLTK. There are some pre-trained models out of Stanford. There is the famous Moses tokenizer available for European languages. So to use these, you really need some basic programming knowledge, how to basically load these models, where these models are coming from, and then how to apply that. But even if you have this knowledge, there are some details that needs to be taken care of. For example, if I use just NLTK and Moses, you can see a simple sentence is like this one. I can produce different results because these tokenizers are using different kinds of rules inside, and they are using different kinds of pre-processing or different kinds of escape mechanism for punctuations, for example. And it's very important to use the right tokenizer for the right model. For example, if you are using an advanced model to clean something and you don't know which tokenizer that advanced model used, then it will not be going to give you the proper results. So it is very important to choose the right tokenizer. And then not all tokenizers can handle all the languages. For example, if I try to use Moses on Chinese, that will not going to work right. So to tokenize Chinese, I need a customized Chinese tokenizer. To tokenize Japanese, I need a customized Japanese tokenizer. So what we are doing in Taos is we are creating this library of different specialized tokenizers. We are also writing our own custom rules for different languages. And then whenever there is a request coming for cleaning or for data matching data, we first apply the tokenization according to that language so that we can apply the further cleaning steps accordingly. So this is the first and most important step to identify the word boundaries. Then comes the deduplication. So this is one of the main problems, especially in large translation memories, that there is a lot of repetition of the same sentences. And when you are actually training an MP engine, if the data is repeated heavily, that might give you bad results, because it's all about learning the patterns. And if there is an overwhelming amount of the same repetition, that means it will give favor to those sentences only. But deduplication, although sounds very easy, that you have to identify which of the sentences are repeating and you have to remove that, but it is not that easy. So for example, just to define the problem, what is a duplicate? Whether the duplicate is just the source side, or whether a duplicate is a combination of source and target combined. Because in a particular scenario, you can say I need variation in translation. So the source can be same, but there could be multiple translations on the target side. So should I count that as a unique data set point, or should I remove that just basis on the source? So it can vary. And then what about when there is only very small, minute differences, for example, in punctuation? So should I count that a duplicate or not? Or whether if there are, let's say, close matches. So there is a same sentence with a date, and then there is a repetition of the same sentence with a different date, or just with a different number. Should I count that a duplicate or not? So we have different strategies of deduplicating the corpus based on whether aggressive deduplication is required, or whether normal deduplication is required, and or also according to the request of the clients. But then the question comes whether it is just a string matching problem. So if we are taking a sentence and then we have to find out how many sentences are there which are similar, can we just match based on the string? So that's also not very easy, because as I said, that first we need to identify the right tokenization, but also before that we need to identify whether there are some encoding issues which are making the sentence different. So for example, in Japanese, there are half-width characters and full-width characters, which looks identical, but when you try to do string matching, they will be not the same. Or if there is spacing issues in the data where the spaces are not normalized, or if there is punctuation issues where the punctuations are not normalized, then the same identical looking sentences will still remain in the data. So we have to do all this pre-processing first, and then we can apply the deduplication steps. But also, when you have, let's say, 10 million sentences, how to basically load all this data into memory, whether we load all these sentences or how we're going to match it with each of the sentences. So to perform this deduplication, you first have to tokenize, and if you are doing just the lowercase matching, you have to lowercase that, but then you have to convert that tokenized version into a hash or a unique identifier, so that the text will become a number, a unique number just for that text. And then you can just apply matching of these hashes to find out whether they are duplicates or not. And this process can be distributed on multiple computers if the translation memory is huge. Otherwise, it can take a lot of time. So this is the second step that we usually perform, is that after tokenization, we first remove everything that is duplicated. Okay. Then the third part is language identification. And this is also something very interesting, because a lot of the time what happens is that if a user is providing us a file which claims that it is English to Spanish, but on the Spanish side, you can find French sentences, or the English side, you can find German sentences. So how to basically identify that? There are already a lot of different tools available to basically identify the languages. I've mentioned two of them here, which are one of the most used these days. One is FastText, which is from Facebook Research Labs, and it supports 176 languages according to their web page. And then there is CLD3 from Google, which also supports more than 100 languages. But in our experimentation, what we have seen that not every language is identified correctly. So what we have did in our experiment is we tried all these tools for many different languages, and we identified for which language which tool works better. And also, when the sentences are small, then there could be problems with these tools to identify the right language. So we have come up with a lot of different algorithms to find out what would be the combination, whether we can do a voting, whether we need to predict multiple languages from the same tool. And all of that is handy to come to a conclusion and to find out the right language. And once you know the right language, then you can just, based on the provided language, you can identify that, okay, if this is English and I can find a German sentence there, I have to remove that, and vice versa. But still there is a difficulty in shorter sentences. So you can actually apply these language identification tools, but you can also restrict that into based on length, you can restrict, or based on language, you can restrict that, okay, this language is not supported, so I will not going to run on this language. And we have already done a lot of experiments, so we already know how to handle this and how to run it on different languages. Once you have the language identified and already data is deduplicated, now we have left with data that has the problems like misalignments or different other types of encoding issues. Some of these problems can easily be solved by some basic heuristic rules. You can write, for example, a regular expression, or you can write a very simple program that can give you a very good results to eliminate some of these problems. So for example, a very common problem in data is that the source and the target is the same sentence. So although the translation memory or a file is claiming that it is bilingual data for English to, for example, German, but on some lines are exactly same. And although this looks like how this could harm an NLP model or a machine translation model, but in many papers they have discussed this issue that this very harmless noise, if it's about 5% of the data, then it can really ruin a model, and it can the blue scores can go down up to 7 or 10 points. So although this looks like, okay, this will not going to have any problems, but it can create a lot of problems. And also how to identify what exactly is same, the meaning of same. So for example, I have given 2 examples here. So in the first example, I have English and French, and both of the sentences are in English and identical, and that is easy to identify. We can again use the same techniques to generate a hash first and then compute according to that and remove this. But what about the second example? Because it's just an address. So if I go for a string matching algorithm and I will say this is same, then it's not, because in both languages it should be same. So we can also use, for example, name entity recognition, and we can use the language identification in the previous step that we did, and we can use a combination of that to identify whether the source and the target is the same or not. Similarly, we can apply length-based filters. So again, the tokenization part was very important here as well, because if you identify the words and the punctuations rightly, then you can identify the length of the sentence in terms of words. And then if this length-based filters can only work on languages where we know the ratio of the source sentence and the target sentence length. And if we know that, we can actually predict a lot of problems easily by just applying a threshold that the source and the target ratio cannot go below this. So for example, in this example of English-Italian, only the first part of the sentence is translated and the rest is missing. And this could be identified very easily by calculating the lengths and identifying the ratio. And we can add a threshold that, okay, if in an English-Italian corpus, if the threshold of the ratio is less than this, then just remove that. Then there are some very basic rules that can give you a lot of sentences that are not very useful for any task. For example, in this case, we can identify whether a sentence is only numbers or only punctuations, or the majority of the words in the content are overwhelmingly numbers and punctuations. So we can identify these kind of things very easily by a regular expression, and we can remove such things as well. But not only that, but with custom rules, you can also correct some of the data. So we have noticed in our data from Data Cloud that a lot of the times there are encoding issues that is a repeated pattern, and you can just write a very simple regular expression to correct that. Here I'm just giving one example where apostrophe is converted into a foreign character in English, and then we can apply this regular expression and it could be easily solved. But there are a couple of tools also available that solves a lot of orthographic and encoding issues for certain languages. One is the Fixes Text for You, FTFY, and the other one is BiFixer, which is coming out of the Paracrawl consortium. And we can apply this to many of these languages to resolve some of the main encoding issues, and the rest of the things that we already know can be solved by writing custom rules. Okay, so till now we are just talking about what we can do by writing some very simple rules. But when you have everything passed through all these filters, now you have a sentence where the length looks good, language looks good, but it is still does not have a proper translation. How to solve that? And to talk about this, I will give the mic to Andras.
Yes, thank you, Amir. So I would like to talk about, first of all, my name is Andras Shafurni, and I am the NLP research analyst here at TAUS. And I would like to talk about one of these more advanced piece of technology that we're using, and that is sentence embeddings. So I'm going to spend a little more time on this topic because it's really one of the newest additions to our toolkit, and I also think that it's very exciting in terms of current state-of-the-art NLP applications. So to take a step back to begin with, why do we need embeddings? So the problem is, of course, that we need to find a way to represent text in a way that so that computers can understand it. And of course, computers are not good at working with language, so you need to convert this language into a language that the computers can understand, which is, in this case, the language of mathematics. So from text, you turn, you get vectors or embeddings of vectors. They can be used interchangeably, basically. So that takes a linguistic problem and turns into a mathematical problem, which is something that computers can indeed more easily deal with. So sentence embeddings are simply dense, high-dimensional vectors that are obtained from text. Now, some of you might already be familiar with the idea of word embeddings, which is sort of what sentence embeddings have been inspired by. So I'm going to introduce that concept briefly. So word embeddings have been really transformative to the field of natural language processing a few years ago because basically they are a way to convert words to vectors so that you can learn them from context. So if you have a large corpus with a lot of words, you can, based on what words appear together, you can actually learn vectors. And these vectors, they encode semantic information about these words, which is something new that this kind of information wasn't available before. So, for example, the kind of information they encode is that similar words will be close together in the resulting vector space. So you have names of animals or names of plants. They will be close together in each other's neighborhood. Or certain word analogies can also be observed. So, for example, you can observe word analogies such as Athens is to Greece as Berlin is to Germany, and lots of other semantic and syntactic relationships. And then this idea sort of evolved into the idea of sentence embeddings. You're doing basically the same with sentences. So starting with a large corpus of many millions of sentences, you can train different machine learning models to learn these vectors. And that results in what we call a vector space, where all of these vectors are represented together. And I'm trying to move. I want to go back one, sorry. Yes, so for example, what are some of the relationships that we can observe in a vector space like this? So for example, you can measure similarity between a number of sentences, whether they mean something similar. You can establish whether they contradict each other or not. You can find out if one entails another, and you can also assess their translational equivalence. So if you have a multilingual model, and I'm going to talk a little bit about this in detail, then you can find out if two sentences are translations of each other. So for instance, if you have a look at this this graph or plot here on the right side of the screen, I hope you can all see and read the text. This is a two-dimensional representation of a very high dimensional vector space. And what you can see here is that we plotted 9 sentences in a bunch of different languages. So this is a multilingual sentence embedding model. And you can see that that sentences, the vectors of sentences rather, that mean the same are closely clustered together. So if you look at the top, there you have 3 sentences represented by those 3 dots that are about dolphins, and they all mean the same in English, Finnish, and Russian. And then, for instance, at the bottom left corner, there's also a cluster, and also in the bottom right corner, a little bit above that, there's another cluster of sentences that are indeed from different languages but have the same meaning. And this is very useful because if you have this embedding space or vector space, you can use it to perform a lot of different operations, and you can find very interesting patterns in your data. So the question is, how do I get sentence embeddings? How can I compute these? So one of the ways, of course, is to use word embeddings, which are possible to be. You can download them from the internet, and with a bit of programming knowledge, basically you get a dictionary where you have a word on one side and its vector on the other. And then once you have a tokenized sentence, Amir mentioned tokenization before. Once you have a tokenized sentence, you can take the vector of each of the words of the sentence, and then, for example, take the average of all those vectors, and that'll give you a sentence embedding. Now, this is considered a strong baseline, but it's not the best option it's not the best way to do it, because, for example, if you think about it, if you just take the average of all these vectors, then a lot of the semantic information disappears, and also syntactic information such as word order. So that's not the only way to go. So more recently, a number of different ways have been proposed that are based on machine learning. So for instance, you can have a variety of supervised or unsupervised machine learning methods to learn these sentence embeddings from corpora containing sentences. And these are also available pre-trained. So there are a bunch of open source, publicly available models that have been published by large tech corporations such as Facebook and Google, that one can download and then implement. And of course, it's also possible to train your own neural network to produce sentence embeddings, but it's really quite a difficult endeavor, and that will take a long time. So an interesting aspect of these sentence embeddings is that you can have language-specific or monolingual, and also language-agnostic or multilingual models. So, for example, a language-specific model is trained on data from a single language, such as, let's say, English, and you can use that to generate vectors for English sentences, whereas multilingual models can be trained on data from many languages, even over 100 languages, and those then generate encodings or vectors for sentences in all of these languages. So if you look at the plot again, this is from a multilingual model. So what does this what does it actually look like what does it actually mean when I talk about sentence similarity? So as soon as your sentences have been converted to vectors, basically it's all a mathematical problem, as I said before. What you have to do is you have to find ways to compare the vectors themselves, and it's no longer a matter of what the text was. So one standard method is to look at the cosine similarity of two vectors. That is simply the cosine of the angle between these two vectors if you're comparing two sentences. So that's a simple mathematical operation, and it's very easy to work with because that similarity is a number between 0 and 1, where the closer it is to 0, or sorry, the closer it is to 1, the higher the similarity. So that means that two sentences that are exactly the same would have a similarity of 1. And if you have a look at this table at the bottoms of the slide, then here you can see that on the left we have sentences in English, on the right we have sentences in German, and then two scores calculated by two different multilingual models based on their vectors. So these models are Laser and LabSE. And you can see in the top example that, and if you speak these two languages, then you can also see that these are actually good translations of each other. And the models also tell us that they have high similarity, close to 1. That means that they are probably good translations. Okay, but if we move down a little bit, then the score goes down as well. So why does that happen? Well, that happens because, so for example, we have the English segment on the source side and the German segment on the target side, but the German segment actually contains two sentences. So there's that little dangling sentence at the beginning, highlighted in red, which really shouldn't be there. It's not part of the source, and that is dragging the score down. So already this model is telling us that something's wrong here, so it's given us a lower score. And when you have something like the bottom example, the two sentences are not even close to each other in meaning, they're completely different, then the scores are vastly lower. And it's also interesting to note, and I'm going to talk about this in detail a little bit later, that the two models actually give different scores. Sort of the patterns are the same, but the scores are not the same because, of course, the vectors that they generate are different. So what can we do with this? What are some of the possible applications? Of course, here at Taos, we are using this technology primarily for data cleaning, but you can use it for semantic search, clustering, intent detection, paraphrase detection, or if you have, if you're trying to crawl the web for parallel text, then that's also an option, and to detect whether something is a good transition or not. As I mentioned before, some models are publicly available. These include SentenceBird, InferSent, Universal Sentence Encoder, and two of the state-of-the-art language agnostic or multilingual models, Laser and LabSC. And so these models are basically all fairly complex neural networks. And even though you don't necessarily have to understand how they work, it's good to keep it in mind. And so this illustration here on the right is basically just the architecture of the transformal neural network, which has really been very influential in NLP recently and really has had a very influential effect on the field of machine translation, especially. And this is the kind of model that, for example, serves as the basis of something like SentenceBird or LabSC. So as you can see, there's a lot happening here under the hood. So it's not enough only to understand what these models are, but one also has to have a certain understanding of how to implement them and how to use them. So of course, you're going to need programming skills that allow you to use and implement the models. Most of these are implemented for Python, which is becomes sort of a standard programming language for natural language processing. And of course, it's good to have an understanding of the data science toolkit libraries such as TensorFlow, NumPy, Keras, and sort of all the basic machine learning and mathematical libraries for Python. But then, of course, you have to be aware that there are hardware requirements. So you are going to need GPUs, whether it's in-house or a cloud computing solution. If you have thousands, hundreds of thousands of sentences and you want to encode them, you're going to need GPUs for that. And you have to understand how to put multiple GPUs to use. So that's also some more background in understanding GPUs. And of course, as I mentioned before, the models are indeed different, and they can do different things. For example, Laser can support 93 languages, whereas LabSC supports slightly more, 109. And we found that Laser is not specifically great for short sentences, and that is because it wasn't trained for that kind of data. But on the other hand, LabSC is better for shorter segments, but Laser is good for other reasons. So what we would like to do is to combine these different vectors and then see what kind of representation they result in. So we've been really experimenting with different combinations of these vectors and how to put them to use for different language pairs, and what kind of thresholds to use for cleaning, because all of this depends on a lot of different factors. And so here in my last minute, I would like to talk a little bit about what exactly we do for data cleaning and how we are using sentence embeddings. So as Amir talked about the first steps, such as tokenization and language identification, and it's important that this has to be performed first because that saves you a lot of trouble. For example, embeddings, they cannot detect whether something is the right language or not. If you think your data is in, if you expect your data to be in German, but there's like 1% of English data in there, you have to use a language identification tool to detect that, because the embedding tools are not going to do that for you. Of course, tokenization has to be performed. So it's important to keep in mind that there is an order to doing these things, and that begins with rule-based filtering. And that is the sort of things that Amir has been talking about. And then you can move on, or we can move on to the actual cleaning, which is selecting high-quality translation pairs. If you have, let's say, a parallel corpus that you want to clean, for example, you want to create, you have a machine learning model which you'd like to test, and then you want to get high-quality, reliable, clean test data. One way to do that would be to compare all the sentences in your data for semantic similarity and only keep the ones that have a semantic similarity very close to 1. That way you can more or less guarantee that it's high quality. Another step that is possible to apply is to select segments that are relevant to a given domain. So if, for example, a client has a query corpus that is composed of a couple of thousands of sentences in the medical domain, for example, then we can take that and compare that corpus with our database based on these embeddings, and we can return a much larger corpus. So that's also what is basically the idea behind our matching data algorithm. So as a last interesting note here, I'd like to mention this joint study that we did with FBK, a research institute based in Italy, where we looked at 5 different language pairs, and we had a task to detect whether a translation pair, a pair of sentences, is clean or not. And we used both an embeddings-based method and a previous or state-of-the-art algorithm for cleaning parallel corpora. It's called ByCleaner. And we found that in almost all cases except for one, the embeddings-based cleaning method actually outperformed the other state-of-the-art method. So that's basically proof for us that embeddings work really well, and they add a lot to the data cleaning part. So I'd like to thank you for your attention. If you have any questions, please let me know in the Q&A, and I'm going to give the mic back to Amir.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, so basically, till now, what we have seen is basically the main steps, the mandatory steps that we need to clean the data. But sometimes you have different kind of requirements. So we are also doing custom cleaning based on any specific task or any specific requirement. For example, in the past, we were also doing custom data creation for specific kind of grammatical categories. So from the larger repository, if you need only the sentences which a male person is saying or things like that, we can collect that and filter the rest of the out. Or in some examples, we need a specific length. The lower length should be this, higher length should be this. We can create these kind of corpora as well. Or in some scenarios, some type of vocabulary is not required, so we can filter that out. So there could be a lot of different custom rules that we can apply on top of all the rules that we already have in our pipeline. So this is some step which is not mandatory, but depending on the situation. Then there is also this anonymization task. I'm just going to be very quick about this because we are running short of time. So in anonymization, what we need is we need to identify personal and identifiable information, which different libraries can do. But the thing that can't be automated right now is how to identify the context, because anonymization really depends on context. So let's say if I identify that there is a name, there is an address, but whether that address needs to be anonymized and the anonymization can give me something or not. So for example, in these two examples, the first sentence, this is a publicly available information. And although the library will say that there is a name and an address, I don't have to anonymize that. But in the second example, it's about a patient, and this is a very sensitive information. So here I need to apply some rules. And this is something that we cannot do automatically. So here comes the part where we have this platform called Human Language Platform, and we have a lot of crowd workers working for us, and we can actually stream all these anonymization tasks to them as a micro jobs, and they can actually see these tags which already put in place by the automatic APIs, and then they can identify whether something needs to be removed or not according to the requirements of the client and the task. And furthermore, as Anders mentioned, that we have domain adaptation. So we already were using the matching data algorithm for that earlier, which was based on a TF-IDF kind of retrieval algorithm. But now with sentence embeddings, we can combine the two, and we can create much better semantically based filtering for domains. So we can really generate very high quality domain specific data sets. And not only that, if there are huge translation memories and somebody wants to know how many different domains are there, because over the time people have created these translation memories which grows very large, and different kind of noises are added there. So we can actually identify different clustering in that translation memory, and we can create smaller data sets for different domains, and that then later can be used or identified which domain it is and can be used to train specific domain specific engines. And in the last, on top of all of this, we also offer human evaluation, again, based on the human language project workers, and they can do intrinsic or extrinsic evaluations. We can also train empty engines to verify the data that is clean was much better than the previous data. And we can do this all based on some sampling, and then the workers can provide us more feedback that will give us more customization possible if required. So I think I will end here, and then I will go back to Milos. Yeah, thank you.
Milos, you're muted.
Hi, I'll just add a few more lines about the Human Language Project. So thank you for a nice overview. The HOP is basically fully in-house built platform where control communities are working on different data creation or data annotation tasks. What we are proud of is a fair cooperation principle where we are paying the workers fairly. Furthermore, we are directly paying them through our payments API, and they get payments weekly or bi-weekly, depending on a country and a geo. Currently, we have 23 plus languages available with the possibility to create a controlled crowd and a community in a very short notice and teach them to accomplish different type of data creation or data annotation tasks. We are also proud of our referral rate of 98% and satisfaction with the payment rates of 94%. And the last slide is a summary of all the steps Amir and Andras talked about. Some steps are automated, some steps are supervised, some steps are involving manual actions from HOP communities and HOP workers. And depending on use case, depending on what type of data has to be cleaned, we invite you to contact our member services at taos.net for more details and pricing, so we can talk which model fits your data cleaning needs the best, or whether there should be only automated cleaning supervised, or also there is some manual work involved from our HOP community. So we look forward to speaking with you about data cleaning services. And back to you, Annemai, with questions and answers. We are a bit over time, so let's go to questions and answers.
Great, thanks, Milos, and of course, Andras and Amir. We already have received a couple of questions. One of the questions is that the question is about scraping data or data collected, crawled from the web versus parallel data from TM. So what are the steps when it comes to cleaning? What changes in the steps when you have crawl data or TM data? Is there a change?
So principally, there is no change. The result is different. So when you have crawl data, then you know that there will be a lot of errors. And in some cases, there are some models that are not really designed to handle this kind of problem where most of the data is actually wrong and only the small amount is good. So basically, we have to use the right models for doing these cleanings. But for example, this embedding thing is really nice. It can work very good for crawl data, and it can identify whether something is a good translation or not. And not only that, but in many cases, there is like a good translation which is part of the sentence, and the rest of the sentence is wrong. So we can, develop algorithms that can split the data and then identify which part is right and which part is wrong, and then throw the rest of it. But overall, most of the rules are the same. It's just about how much data will be thrown when you are doing the crawling.
Great, thank you. Another question, and please type in your questions if you have any, is are the automatic cleaning steps going to be available through the data marketplace?
Yeah, so especially the 5 that we mentioned that are mandatory, it will be part of the marketplace. We are working on the final release, which is in 6 months. Once it will be available, if anyone is publishing data to the marketplace, these will be applied free of charge. But if someone just needs to use the cleaning services, they can upload the data, but the data will not be published, but they can download that back by paying some fees.
Yeah. Great. Amir, a lot of questions for you. There's also a question about hash matching, which you briefly touched upon in, I think, step 4. Can you explain a little bit more about what that is?
Yeah, so basically when you are trying to compare 2 strings, one straight away method is that you can say, okay, these are 2 strings, I can match character by character, and if it match completely, then it's a same string. But that takes a lot of operations and that will take a lot of time. So the easy way, because you don't have to compare it with just one string, you have to compare it with the million string to find out how many duplicates are there. So rather than doing this, you can convert each sentence into a hash, which is a unique number that can be just generated by that particular text. So no other text will be the same, generate the same number. So we can take this and then we can build a hash table in programming language, and then we can just identify whether something is already there when we are inserting a new one. And if something is already there, that means this insertion is not required and this is a duplicate, and we can just remove that.
Great. There's another question here, which is a bit more elaborate. And he's excusing himself that it might be a bit of a naive question, but I don't think there are naive questions at all, so no worries there. Is there one or a few good tail languages, assuming English is the source, to get started with MT for short strings? The context would be product UI translation. Does it make sense to have a glossary set of sentences from existing product UI strings to review or edit? And if so, what volume is needed? Are there standard tools specialized in that?
That's a tricky question because it really depends on the kind of data. So sometimes the amount of data does not matter, but how much vocabulary, for example, it's covering, that matters, or how much different kind of grammatical aspect is capturing, that matters. Because if you take like a million sentences, but they are repeating the same words, then they will not going to give you anything good. But also, if you are trying to do a domain specific model, so you are actually customizing already available generic model, how good that generic model is, that also going to dictate whether this will going to work better or not. So there is no like a formula that this much data will be helpful. It's all about the quality of the data and how much coverage it is giving to that particular problem. And if that's there, even the small amount can actually give you a very good results.
Great. Question for Milos, I think. How do we get started using the DAO's data cleaning services?
Yes, so as I said in the presentation, it would be the best that you contact us in the member services email, where we can understand what's the best fit for your use case. So what are you looking to accomplish? So understanding what the goal is would actually help us define what services would be the most helpful. Of course, the pricing depends on the volume of data. We're offering volume discounts, and we are pricing the clean services per number of millions of words. So let's connect after the webinar, contact us on member services, and we'll take it up from there.
Great, thank you. Do you correct terminology in sentences which is forbidden based on a provided term base?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, the sixth step, which is about anything that client require, a very custom kind of cleaning. So we can add that on top of all the cleaning steps. So it really depends on what is the needs of the client and what are the requirements. So we can adapt our cleaning API and our cleaning pipeline according to that.
Another question, have you experienced that you are excluding valid short strings by excluding sources, target, brand names, product features, for example?
Yeah, a lot of times this actually happens that some of the rules, they exclude good sentences as well. But the amount of this data that is being excluded is much less than the amount of bad data that we identify. So rather than leaving bad data inside, what we like is that we can actually throw away some good data. But the majority of the data, if it's clean, then we are much happier. So if some of the data is lost during the whole process, that's okay.
And another important question, what is the throughput time for cleaning of a data set, say 1 million words?
Yeah, it depends on a lot of factors, especially what is the architecture behind. So usually 1 million words, it can take few hours, less than an hour maybe. But then if we are adding all these steps where the humans are involved, then it can take some time, because whenever there is a request, we also do some internet evaluations to make sure that everything is correct and the quality is nice. So that part can take a little bit more time. And then there is our feedback loop. So once everything is done, we provide a sample. The client comes back to us with any problems if they can find, and then we do the same again. So just the processing time can vary based on what GPUs you are using and what how many GPUs you are using. But 1 million words can be can usually done in a couple of hours.
Great. We do have time for maybe 1 or 2 more questions. So let's see if something more comes in. In the meantime, maybe because we did indeed run out of time a little bit, was there anything that you still wanted to add to your presentation that you skipped through, or?
No, I think the most important thing that is the takeaway is that all of these things are available, but these are very language dependent things. So what we are doing in Taos, we are trying to test with the different languages to find out the right parameters, to find out the right thresholds. So for example, if we are using embeddings, what would be the threshold after which something is wrong and above which something is right? So we are trying to do experiments and the combination of different embedding mechanisms. So this is the expertise that we are offering, that now we have all this knowledge and we can fix the data and make it much better for MT.
Great. So we have 1 minute left. Somebody writes, it's not a question, but rather a comment. Very good presentation. Thank you. So Amir, Andras, and Milos, thank you indeed so much for your presentations today. I just want to take a few seconds to announce the next webinar. On the 23rd of March, 4 weeks from now, we'll be talking about training data and specifically training data optimization. So join us again on the 23rd of March. And for now, I wish you all a great day or evening and see you next month. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.